No. Good morning, Hildur. How are you this morning? Hi, good morning.
I'm terrific.
Oh, great, great, great. As you know, I'm Keith Fiveson with the Work Mindfulness Project for the Center for Wellbeing, and this is your environment now. And it's a real opportunity for us to talk about what's happening in the environment and how do we make a difference in the world? How do we really be the change? So Hildur, who do we have? I see Ryan just popped up. So who do we have as our
Yes,
today?
I just spotlighted Ryan Madden, and I would like him to introduce himself and what he does. I am impressed with the work he's doing in the world. A few years ago, I been following closely the work of the Long Island Progressive Coalition, and it just so happens I put a link here in the chat of a campaign that they're launching today. So there will be a lot to talk about. So I really don't want to take up the word. But if you click on the link, and I could share my screen just quickly because we like sharing good news here. So look, can you see my screen right now? Yeah, so here's the action item for today. Climate, jobs, and justice recovery. A virtual rally kicks off at noon. And Ryan, could you maybe explain, start by sort of informing us what that means?
Good morning, Ryan. So nice to see you. Nice to see you this morning. Thank you, Hildur.
Morning, everyone. Yeah, so my name is Ryan Madden. I'm the sustainability organizer for the Long Island Progressive Coalition. We're a 40-year-old grassroots organization that fights for structural change at the local, state, and national level to attain racial justice, build community wealth, and realize a just transition to a 100% renewable energy economy. As we saw on the shared screen, we're joining today our statewide coalition, New York Renews, for a climate, jobs, and justice recovery campaign launch. To share a little bit more background, New York Renews is a coalition of over 200 organizations across New York State, from community organizations, faith-based groups, labor unions, environmental justice communities. That was the kind of grassroots force behind New York's landmark climate bill that passed in 2019, called the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which essentially ensures that by 2050, every sector of New York State's economy is moved away from fossil fuels, and that we have a dedicated investment of no less than 35% of the benefits of clean energy spending going to environmental justice communities and other low-income communities and communities of color that have borne the brunt of the extractive fossil fuel economy, who should be at the front of the line as we transition to a renewable and hopefully more regenerative economy. And so today, the kind of next tier in our campaign is to basically fund this just transition. And we want to do that by holding corporate polluters accountable for the pollution that they put into our air, so that we can invest in communities hit hardest by climate change, create good green jobs, and invest in other community-led transition programs to ensure that, again, communities and workers most impacted by climate change are at the forefront of the solutions. And so today we have already over 1,000 people registered for our virtual rally, where we'll hear from a diversity of leaders across the climate justice movement to kind of tease out our plans to win this climate, jobs, and justice recovery in the midst of a global health pandemic and uprisings over the movement for Black lives, and the kind of intersectional approach that is necessary to adequately tackle the climate crisis.
Great. So Ryan, on that site that Hildur had brought up, is that the place to register typically? Okay.
Yeah, so there'll be a two-step process if you're able to register, the Action Network link that was shared, and then you'll get an email asking you to register for the actual Zoom line. And we'll also be broadcasting live on the New York Renews Facebook page.
And that starts at 12 noon, is that correct?
Correct.
Wow. So
And
you're very calm for you having over 1,000 people join you on your Zoom link. We've got the benefit of having you just here about 2 hours before that starts. It's a very exciting effort.
Yeah, well, the great thing about a diverse 200 plus coalition is there's a lot of folks to share the work.
Good, good.
I like that, the collaborative approach. And you mentioned New York Renews. Could you sort of explain to us the difference, if any, or similarities between those two groups, New York Renews and Long Island Progressive Coalition, and your mission with both? Yeah.
Yeah, so New York Renews is a statewide effort. It came out of a lot of the organizers behind the People's Climate March in 2014 wanted to come together to kind of formalize a policy platform, points of unity around the intersection between economic, racial, and environmental justice. And so they did a kind of like road tour of the entire state of New York, engaging with different community-based organizations and formations throughout the state to kind of engage them around what would an inclusive, equitable climate policy look like for you and your community. And so over the course of a year, they did this deep community engagement and helped lay the groundwork for this coalition. Again, kind of unprecedented in bringing together labor unions, community organizations, traditional environmental groups, and environmental justice communities to advance a robust platform to realize a just transition in New York State by moving our entire economy off of fossil fuels and holding corporate polluters accountable to invest in this transition.
That's such an important point. And it's been increasingly clear to me in terms of the environmental justice movement is inseparable from the racial justice movement. As those communities are hit hardest, who have been considered minorities. I'd love for you to speak on that, how we can hold polluters accountable, how you envision that.
Sure, and just to, in terms of, so the Long Island Progressive Coalition is one of the coalition members of New York Renews. We're on the steering committee and help do a lot of regional organizing to implement the statewide campaign efforts. So just, to articulate that relationship. And so, yeah, I mean, for decades, polluting entities, fossil fuel companies have gotten away with, polluting without any accountability. I think, this is national and, global, but like 100 private and state-run fossil fuel entities are responsible for like 80% of all historic greenhouse gas emissions. It's a very concentrated number of like entities and literally individuals who are like responsible for this massive climate injustice, including the United States, which is as a whole responsible for 70% of historic greenhouse gas emissions. So we have an undue responsibility to be materially supporting the transition, not only for ourselves, but also those in the global South who are impacted first and worst while having contributed the least to the problem and have been at the brunt of, an economic system that is inherently imperial and extractive, where the United States, gets to do as it pleases on the backs of the third world. And so, as you mentioned, environmental justice not being able to be, divorced from climate justice is that realizing that the conversation around climate change is a conversation not only about electrons, but colonialism. So it's deeply rooted in the fabric of our entire social, political, and economic system. So we believe that we need to, at least in New York State, hold those corporate polluting entities accountable by issuing at the most upstream point of extraction a price per ton on their emissions, which means that there's some back-end accounting that happens based on whether they imported into the state wholesale bulk purchases of fossil fuel resources that then get levied a fee on them that goes into a series of funding streams in order to support community-led just transition programs. And we've done some economic analyses, and there was a huge jobs report done by the Perry Institute out of UMass Amherst that determined that our plan would raise $7 to $10 billion annually. And over the course of the next couple of decades, create 150,000 jobs every single year in this transition.
So you reward and penalize based on the carbon footprint, if you will, based on
and co-pollutants
and the co-pollutants that are involved with that. So in terms of accountability, I would imagine that net, that if you will, how do you account for that? I mean, in terms of, actually policing it, watching it, measuring it, doing things like that. What does that look like? I imagine that's a humongous task.
Yeah, I mean, and there's already some precedent for it. New York State is part of a kind of a regional consortium called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which already has like a cap and trade system for wholesale pollution coming out of states, where like each state has a like cap of how much pollution that they're permitted, and then they sell and trade permits based on whether or not they've exceeded that limit or undergone that limit, and then they can trade emissions and stuff. So I mean, that's an overly complicated, explicitly market-based mechanism. But it's between that and the system's benefit charge on people's electricity bills are the main funders of clean energy programs in New York State. So it's similarly like we know we have a greenhouse gas, even if imperfect, greenhouse gas inventory. So we know the major sources of pollution. We know the major industries, and we know, because there's different, economic indicators and like proof of like companies importing, fossil fuels extracted from other parts of the country, a lot of, frack gas from Pennsylvania, for example. So like there are points of intervention that we like know because they're quantified, they're understood. And it's at that point, the most upstream point of extraction, to hold the corporations accountable to institute that fee, which again, we already have kind of precedent for through other kind of like emissions trading programs.
And so from a legislation viewpoint, I'm sorry, Hildur, from a legislative viewpoint, are there additional legislative measures that need to go into effect in order to police this, or handcuff it, or measure it, or make sure that they're being held accountable? I'm trying to understand the rally. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So, I mean, we're going to be calling for a general, like, kind of socializing this idea that lands in a specific piece of legislation that is kind of is called the Climate and Community Investment Act. And that has been, it's in like kind of, it was originally written a few years ago, and the political and economic conditions have changed, and there's like, things that we've learned. There's harmonizing with the climate bill that we passed last year. So this bill is like under, revision, development, consultation, making sure that we're doing deep engagement with different community stakeholders and labor unions. And so we're, our plan still is the Investment Act, but the new and improved one pending some work over the next, there's been a lot of work over the last couple of months, but we're kind of like crossing our I's, crossing our T's, dotting our I's, to have a fully fleshed, robust package that legislates this.
The Investment Act that's currently in effect at many of the banks in terms of investing in local efforts. Is it tailed into that, or it's much broader than that, because obviously it's involving the climate area? So it's a revision of that particular Community Investment Act?
Yes.
I
have a comment. I just wanted to comment on something before we move to fast through this terrain. We're basically asking for a systems change in the way things are right now. You're calling for moving towards 100% renewable energy, right? Those are bold claims. And then how to invest in communities that are hit hardest. Like, how do we want to keep the polluters accountable, but this is calling for this is a robust systems change? Like, how do we spin it so that it actually, I'm just curious about the practicality and how to best invest in communities that are hit hardest.
Yeah, and so just to address the end point that you were saying, Keith, like that's federal legislation, so it kind of follows in the model of like needing to do that kind of direct investment, but it's not like a usurping or enveloping into that. It's like its own separate kind of thing, and the language, yeah, is close to, but is different than. So to your point, Hildur, so that's why we approach the kind of transition in this way, is that we first codified into law in New York State that we need to make this wholesale economic transition away from fossil fuels. We mandated that in the form of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which legally requires the implementation of an equity and climate screen at all levels of governance to ensure that no decision moving forward is at odds with the aims of this decarbonization plan. So that's the kind of like institutional changing of the logic of governance that we codified into law, and through the establishment of the decision-making bodies that will be coming up with this like blueprint for how to do that, called the Climate Action Council, along with other working groups and advisory panels, is starting to do that. But we've already seen massive shifts in the priorities of like state-based agencies like the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, the Long Island Power, like, you know, our utility, the Long Island Power Authority, you know, what the state is investing in their clean energy standard and their state energy plan, and as well as like what the private sector is doing in response to things. And if folks have seen, there's been massive, you know, bids or procurement announcements for offshore wind, thousands of megawatts, and agencies aligning with the need for that 35-40% environmental justice community investment. So that was like, that's plan one. And then plan two is like, how do we fund that? We didn't want a lot of like carbon pricing proposals like at the federal level pursued by certain groups are like detached, like they actually require the like gutting of regulatory oversight to like make the pricing mechanism work, where we don't want a pricing mechanism to be the determinant of greenhouse gas reductions. We want to codify that into law, which we already did, and then institute a funding mechanism so that we have reliable, consistent, sustainable resource like revenue to invest in these programs, which we're like now legally binded to do. And so it just, yeah, providing the material support to be able to do that. And especially in this time, you know, the New York State is facing a $14 billion deficit, massive economic downturn because of the impacts of COVID. And so like we need new revenue, and a good place to do that is from the people responsible for perpetuating the problem. And that being tied to our legal mandate to get to a carbon neutral economy by 2050.
So from a Green New Deal viewpoint and perspective, I mean, it sounds like there's a bit of that within the context or construct. And then I'm wondering, you know, if we're looking at some blockage, if you will, on the federal level, because we were talking about the states not getting federal funds at this particular point, and the state deficits, as you just mentioned. I'm wondering, how do we, not only on this call, but the people who are viewing this call at some time in the future, how do we do things from an actionable viewpoint in terms of making sure that not only our state, but our federal legislators really get involved and really make sure that we're doing the things that are alignable with the kind of goals and the efforts that you're putting in place to hold corporations accountable, and then to look at the funding, I think, which is sort of, pardon the term, but, you know, it's a downpour from, you know, organizations, these carbon emission based, you know, gas emission based organizations that are not within the construct or not within the guidelines of what the emission standards are. So how do we get involved to actually make a difference and to make a change? Is it to join the call? That's the first part. Did I set you up, Ryan? Tell me, where are we going?
Yeah, no, perfect. That would be a great next step. You know, we're going to be having some action items that come out of that, including a mass in real time action to ping the governor around this. I won't spoil the secret, but we'll be able to like kind of jam one of their lines by all doing it at the same time. Because what we're trying to do now is like intervene into the conversations around the budget, and that usually starts in like September or October in preparation for a prolonged fight from January to April 1st, in which New York State is like legally, constitutionally required to institute a new budget. So yeah, joining the call, and obviously the call to action that comes from there. And then also, you know, one of the things we'll be calling for is like people to do, you know, at this point still virtual, but in district, you know, grassroots lobby visits to their, you know, senators and assembly members to forward the kind of planks of this, the Climate Jobs and Justice Recovery campaign and the need for polluters to pay. So, you know, it's a kind of like grassroots pressure campaign that we need to assert, you know, at these elected officials. So whether that's doing, you know, regular constituent calls to their offices, doing virtual, you know, lobby visits, you know, writing letters to them, you know, doing social media plugs and, you know, tagging them on their, you know, official accounts en masse. You know, helping to popularize and socialize these ideals by, you know, writing op-eds and submitting letters to the editor. And if, you know, if you're a part of an organization, you can join New York Renews as an official member and join the various committees that they have, like the organizing committee or the lobby committee, in order to help advance more of the like day-to-day campaign implementation. And at the Long Island Progressive Coalition, we also have a climate committee that works to advance kind of like not only pushing for this, but we're doing a lot of kind of like work around implementation around the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act through popular education, community visioning and brainstorming. And then we actually have a solar program where we work with nonprofits and houses of worship to develop solar in an attempt to build more community-owned and cooperatively owned energy infrastructure. And so, you know, from advocacy to direct like project building, we want to help shape and lead on the implementation of this bill locally, regionally, and help get the funding up and running statewide through, again, this kind of grassroots legislative advocacy campaign.
Wow, well, there's a lot there, and I know Hildur has a question, but I just posed a question in terms of being able to go ahead and get a map of things that we can possibly do in terms of being able to click on, repost, stuff like that. Hildur, please.
Yes, I really enjoy the action end of things because it's empowering, especially climate angst is nothing new to me, but it's really a matter of life right now, having access to drinking water and fresh air, and there's no denying it. After speaking to deaf ears for decades, it seems like, you know, it's time. It's really time now, and we must do something. And there is many more of us than the polluters. The big polluters are making the profit, but there's many more of us regular citizens living and breathing, and we want to continue doing so. And I'm here in north of Vermont, and I feel like, I don't know if it's just because there's more trees, but it feels greener in the sense of I feel like there's way more progress with community solar here than what I see on Long Island. So can you speak to that? Why they would be, or am I just sort of in vacation mode, seeing the world a bit greener? How is that?
No, yeah. So, I mean, New York was a little bit like late to the game in instituting policies that allowed for community solar. there's a, you know, the reason we're able to do like residential solar is because of a policy called net metering, which is basically like a one-to-one exchange of like, you put a solar electron into the grid, and then when you're not using that solar energy for your home, or like, so you're using the solar energy for your home, excess energy is going into the grid at night or on, you know, cloudy, rainy days when you're not using the solar, you're using the traditional grid infrastructure to get electrons into your home. And then there's a kind of accounting thing back to back based on how much you put in versus how much you've used. So we needed to enable a policy called community net metering to allow you to basically be able to, on like the back end, account for a solar array on, let's say, a community center or a church or in a field, where like multiple households could sign on as subscribers to this community array, benefit from the electrical production in the form of cost savings, but not have it be like you know, they're not getting the actual electrons to their homes, but that community net metering allows that kind of back-end accounting process. So New York only initiated community net metering like 4 or 5 years ago through the Public Service Commission, but because we have our own public power authority, 6 months later, LIPA adopted it. Then there was like a 2.0. Oh no, sorry. So then after that happened, we moved away from that kind of easy one-to-one exchange with this very complicated policy mechanism called the Value of Distributed Energy Resources, or VDER, where rather than, again, that one-to-one exchange, they created like a value stack of how to determine the price of solar, of distributed solar. And so community solar got kind of undermined in terms of the way it was preferenced and valued. And again, so they did that in the rest of New York State, then LIPA had to adopt it. Then New York State did like a version 2.0 of VDER with new value stacks. LIPA adopted a new version of it. There was a whole fight over the community credit. So how much community solar was valued in that value stack, that like there were so many back and forths that like there was no security among people investing in these types of projects to know that they should do it. And now we're at a point where the community credit is actually like still not high enough to make those kinds of projects like very economically viable. And so people are just not investing in that type of structure. So basically a complicated cluster of delayed decision-making, continued lack of preferencing for community based models and ownership. Yeah.
That brings me to my question. How do you keep your energy renewable personally? In terms of, we're equally interested here, the inner and outer environment, you know, it's reflected in our well-being. So how do you recharge, Ryan Madden, as a sustainability officer on Long Island?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, you know, I have the good fortune of being able to, you know, financially support myself through this work as a paid organizer. But I also do a lot of organizing outside of my like job title. So, and like when you're oriented in such a way, it's like it's part of who you are. It's your identity. It's part of your life. You build it into it. There's no separation from. It's not like, you know, like a 9-to-5 existence, whether or not you're getting paid for it or not, right? And so it's like having to navigate that it's always with you, like you're never really fully putting it down. So there's just some like resiliency that is built, I think, into that once you orient yourself that way. But in terms of like, what do I do to decompress? You know, I go for walks. I enjoy hiking. I, before COVID, was starting to get into improvisational comedy. So that was a lot of fun. I do a lot of reading. I spend time with my partner. I watch shows. I listen to music. I meditate. I go for runs.
Great, wonderful. And so from the inner and the outer perspective, you're finding balance. And also passion. So we'd love to open this up for other questions for folks that are on the line. And why don't we do that now? Are there any other questions for Ryan?
Well, I'd like to offer a comment. Or actually, we'll start with the question.
yourself?
Have you heard of the Restore Mother Nature bond?
Yes, that is no longer happening.
Sadly, why not? Because it was only recently recirculated as something we should get behind. So they dropped it recently?
Yeah, so for folks unfamiliar, earlier this year as a part of the budget, Governor Cuomo offered up a $3 billion environmental bond act to invest in restoration projects, water quality projects, some renewable energy infrastructure work, as that would then have to be voted on the November ballot by New Yorkers to have the state borrow $3 billion specifically for these programs. And because of the fiscal time that we are in, about 2-3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, it was announced that the executive was withdrawing the Bond Act from consideration, so it will not be on the ballot in November.
Well, it's a shame in that we had 30 different environmental organizations in with the DEC and all their policymakers, and we were basing everything on the subwatershed study of the 192 subwatersheds on Long Island. All this research that went in post-Sandy, all this stuff is still kind of alive, and my suggestion to everyone was that we focus on these local projects for habitat restoration. So, we can petition at the door, but we're also inside the room too. We have to understand that there's a real motivation for this, even as they didn't make the right decision this time around. But I would say we're going to have to put people to work en masse if we want to have any sort of civic or social stability. So don't give up. In another couple of months, we could see a nice influx of money to get some of the stuff done.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, a lot of this, we have to shift. I mean, in New York alone, we have to shift one of the world's largest economies away from fossil fuels in the next 30 years.
This is Cuomo's opportunity to be a hero. He's been beating the drums. He's the environmental guy. Now he has people ready on the ground, shovel-ready stuff, and it could be a model for the nation.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, all we need is the Lorax.
I think we got it right there.
I think I got the Lorax.
I think we're all Loraxes, the last stand of Loraxes.
I'm always, that's my favorite movie, by the way, the Lorax. Yes, does anybody else want to comment, or we do have to make a hard stop at 11 because Ryan has a campaign to run. So please, let's communicate your care if you have.
Yes, Ryan, just another question about all of the actions that we might take. I mean, you mentioned quite a few. There was a real good laundry list there, and I'm just wondering, is there a place where those who are interested to go ahead and take part, and whether or not it's social media, to send a letter, to go ahead and make a call, is there a list somewhere that someone can click into to go ahead and be in action?
Sure. Let me just pull up the link to.
Yes, I shared in the chat here the link to New York Renews and Long Island Progressive Coalition. The link for Action Network. Claire has a question. I'm unmuting you, Claire.
And quickly, I'll put into the chat specifically how to join our email action alerts. I will put in my email, rmadden@lipc.org, if you're interested in joining our climate committee. We're meeting this Monday from 6 to 8 p.m. Virtually. But we kind of carry forward a lot of work. We do pretty consistent communication around calls to action. A lot of our members over the last couple of weeks have been doing outreach around the August 19th events. So setting people up to be able to do that, call all their members to get them involved, and yeah, other kind of like interim actions and stuff, because constantly evolving. There's new things happening. So getting a part of the our climate kind of committee for regular updates, or joining yeah, our email list is helpful. And then the last thing I'll share is, again, if you're part of a organization, I would encourage you to join New Yorker News, where you can then get regular updates and have the ability to join committees like the organizing committee, lobby committee, policy committee, in order to, again, on a regular, consistent basis, be in dialogue statewide to help, shape, this new terrain that we're in, where we have a mandate to implement this robust climate justice bill and are fighting to, get equitable funding for it.
Yeah, and as you said, it's a lifestyle. Your work is your life, and your life becomes your work. Claire, you're next.
Yes, hi Ryan. Claire Brazile here. I'm part of a group with Hildur called Transition Down Port Washington, and I think you've with Paul and Margaret.
And
Margaret. Okay, so we're actually in the midst of just starting a conversation, but with our town of North Hempstead councilwoman to get a chief sustainability officer in place for the town of North Hempstead. We don't have a point person for these sweeping, massive infrastructure changes that need to occur. I mean, if you look at our solid waste management, it's in the dark ages. And you just our emails to her, I can just see it's sort of, this is getting done by different departments and blah, blah, blah. Let me look into it, kind of. So I'm wondering, how do we get the person in government, and they're just going to say this person is going to cost too much money, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, basically we're asking for a lot, but the thing is this is what our tax money should be paying for, and not for, antiquated systems. So anyway, I guess I'm looking for, how do we go about pushing this along and making it happen? I don't know if it's I don't know. I'm looking to you. How does one do this? We certainly have the people that are willing to be the ecological commission, hands on the ground, whatever, ready to go. But we don't have that leader that can help make. We're just hitting a brick wall.
So I mean, it's for the entire town of North Hempstead then, right?
Well, it's for the town of North Hempstead, but listen, Port Washington could be a test, test.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
We could, I mean, there's however we go about doing it. I mean, Transition Town Port Washington is just part of the town of North Hempstead, but.
I just wanted to, because the first thing I was going to say is it is actually figuring out who's the ultimate decision maker for who can get you what you want, and then determining what it looks like to target that.
Judy Bosworth is a supervisor.
town supervisor. And so you're getting your council person in Port Washington to try to push up at Judy.
Correct. But
and we should clarify, there used to be a sustainability officer. She moved to Colorado 3 years ago. There was an existing...
Erin Riley, right?
Yes,
right.
Yeah. And there was an ecological commission. And if you look on the website, it looks like there is one, but they never meet. And then our response is that they've sort of given the different environmental responsibilities to the different structures. Instead of focusing efforts on environment, it seems to be diffused.
Right. We're looking for even a more senior level person than Erin was. I mean, Yeah. But anyway, it's a restructure, and how does one go about restructuring?
And I think right now
on the level, I mean,
and we need to be doing this now because we're in a pandemic, and pressure is now on to not take the environment first in our neck of the woods, so to speak, it seems like. And instead of preparing the waterfront for the rising sea levels with, intelligent, structures, it's development is key. and it seems like, you know, instead of an intelligent effort, I feel like profit always wins. And that again brings me back to the Lorax. So we're trying, you know, we need to be really putting pressure right now that environment be placed first in priorities.
Yeah, so my thinking is, I mean, especially if they used to have one and they like what, just didn't rehire because they didn't find someone else?
I think it was, I'm sure it was a budget, you know, it's a budget thing. And they're saying, oh, we're doing compost, you know, we're doing compost, you know, seminars, you know, for people and selling rain barrels and you know, oh, this is our environmental program, and we're just.
And I think Claire and I want. We're more progressive than that. We want that community compost.
I mean, this is urgent, and if we need to execute in the town of North Hempstead these aggressive goals that from the Climate Act, we need that point person who's very educated and you know, senior. I mean, steal them from Orlando, Florida. I mean, we just need to be, you know, getting that we don't even have a chief sustainability officer, commissioner. We don't even have an office for this. I mean, in the town of North Hempstead, it doesn't exist. You know, there's a building office, but so.
Yeah. I mean, I would think, you know, what do elected officials respond to is pressure of maybe not getting reelected or bad publicity or, you know, relentless constituents. So like what's because like, I'm thinking like Elaine Phillips in Port Washington when she was state senator, it only took her 300 phone calls to get her to support what was at the time the Climate and Community Protection Act after being like, I don't know anything about this bill. And being one of 3 Republicans, the other 2 being other Long Island Republicans that we got on to sponsor the bill. So there's probably actually not that large of a threshold to get this, like to pester her about this, right? And so from a community standpoint is like getting those kind of phone calls or letters into there, and then maybe also identifying other towns where they have sustainability officers and like having them chime in. And like in your outreach, in your letters, in whatever kind of direct communication you have with them is like, you all are gonna be on the hook for this. Like there's this climate bill coming that is already law of the land. There's an advisory panel specifically on local governments and land use that they're going to be accountable to. And it's like, do you want to wait and be told what to do, or do you want to be proactive about how you want to orient yourself around this? And then also, you know, part of, you know, I know there's a lot of like expertise in this area that is like sometimes required, but I also like, you know, my orientation in a lot of this stuff is like, we need to ultimately do it ourselves because I don't trust the state to do it. So it's like, what would it look like for you all to just like start organizing around this stuff to do direct projects in, you know, for yourselves in the ways that you know how to, and like kind of shame the government for not like being the leaders on that. So if there's like small water quality, like community testing that you could do, or like a small part of a barrier that could be like community built, obviously during this time, please do it safely. But it's kind of like, you know, we're not going to wait for you. Or community convenings that could like help be like participatory planning processes for these that are not waiting on someone else to lead it, which is harder to do, right? But I think there's some kind of, I come up against, and sometimes it's like, I don't know exactly what this looks like, but that we put so much effort into getting other people to, like we delegate that to other people and put a lot of effort in getting them to do what they are like institutionally like prevented from seeing. And so we kind of just like have to do it ourselves, which is much harder. And there's like learning that needs to be involved, but like that same kind of expertise probably exists within the community in different ways, that they don't need to be like appointed or elected in order to do that. You all can kind of just like figure that out together, which again is much harder, but I'm a huge proponent of like community-led governance because I don't trust the state.
Well, that's sort of what transitioned down. That's what we're, you know, that the part of we're doing it ourselves. I know Hildur and I are working on a community compost facility at the Science Museum. Amazing. To literally show the electeds how it should be done. We're not there yet, but we want to be a model for community composting. And then hopefully that can go to a bigger level. But so we're Transition Town, we're doing exactly that kind of thing. But I'm wondering to push, is it worth, I'm sorry, I'm taking everybody's time, but is it worth, is it, go ahead.
No. I just want to be mindful of the time because we're winding down here. Can you sort of maybe cap it up in terms of one last question? And then we can sort of move in terms of Ryan. I just want to say, I think everyone wants you on their team. You're really quite. I would follow you, Ryan. Whatever you're doing, I think you're a wonderful activist, and I really want to follow you. But Claire, please, let's kind of wrap it up, perhaps with.
Okay, I'm done. I don't want to take any more time. Sorry.
And Claire, my email's in the chat. I think we've been in touch before. I'm happy to keep talking. Paul reached out to me with the same question, so we're troubleshooting together.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I think also Ryan, you've really provided some inspirational leadership in terms of your thought and your process, and I'm wondering, just from the standpoint of helping everyone in terms of your cookbook or your game plan. I think it's really a cookbook for activism. Perhaps you can share your thoughts afterwards, or maybe come back to the call and really provide some insights, because you've really done a wonderful job. I see Alicia, you've raised your hand. Do you have any other last points here, please? Alicia?
Oh. I'll unmute Alicia.
Okay. Where are you? Oh, there you are, Alicia. I think you're, let me unmute you. Okay, you should be unmuted now. Yeah, Alicia, unmute yourself. You raised your hand. There you go. Good.
So I'm, my specific expertise is in artwork and community-based things like we're doing here. And then also I do social engagement. So I was curious how I can be of service with my expertise.
Great, and we'll cap off the questions, and I think that'd be a wonderful question for everyone, and perhaps you can give us some insight then, Ryan. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I always struggle sometimes is like, how to best like utilize everyone's like talents and make them feel like plugged in and engaged and involved, because like art is such an integral part of the kind of cultural building that we need to be doing. So it's like, I'm always a proponent of like finding like a political home for yourself, of like what organization resonates with what you're doing, how do they align with your values, how do you want to contribute there, and like making your offerings known and like figuring out what it looks like. Oh, you're doing a demonstration, great. Let me think of some like a thematic banner or like, props that could be utilized. I feel like I would need to hear a little bit more about what your background is, but I think it's like, some groups aren't like even thinking about this. So it's like a little bit more work on your end, but kind of like inserting yourself into the conversation to be like, hey, I want to figure this out. And I'm sure there are other people who, have that hunkering and just don't know what to do with it. So I guess I would just encourage you to like put yourself into spaces where like talents get to be known, and you like listen for things that like resonate with you about how you would want to contribute. And since again, not as many people are doing that kind of like artistic and cultural work as should be, like you'll hopefully be listened to because no one else is doing it.
And I also, just to sort of add to that, Ryan, on the link you sent in terms of join the email action alerts, there is a list of various areas that people can get involved. So it is multidisciplined, and there is an opportunity for people with different talents to kind of keep their focus on each area. Yeah. So that would be great. So we are at the hour here. We're coming up to the hour. I think you've given us all the information in terms of getting a hold of you. And Hildur, do you have any last points? I know we've got a show for next week, and I do want to thank you very much, Ryan, for coming on the show and really being a part of it. And I really was sincere that, you know, I'm inspired by you and your energy and your enthusiasm, and I would definitely follow you, you know, based on what it is that you're doing. I think you're doing great work, and I really, really want to thank you for that this morning. You know, you've got incredible, but thank you very much for that.
Thank you. I'll make one last plug, just that during this time, we've helped kind of establish a mutual aid collective called Cooperation Long Island. And so I've been doing a lot of direct, you know, meeting of people's, you know, material needs during this time, but I've also articulated a kind of like roadmap for a people's economy of how we have more worker and community controlled workplaces, housing systems, food systems, energy planning, etc. So I'm just going to share a link to that document in the chat for folks to review. We're still accepting sign-ons if folks are interested, and yeah, trying to build up a kind of the muscle for like solidarity economy and new economy institution building in our region to have like non-capitalist enterprises inform how we relate to the systems around us.
Fantastic.
I think this is a perfect way to end. Reimagine Long Island. I love the name of this document. So please note this in the chat. cooperationli.org/documents.reimagine Long Island. And in terms of imagination, next week, my friend who ran for president, Andri Magnusson, he will be here with a meditation on time and water. He wrote the book on time and water. He's also wrote the plaque in memory of our first glacier to melt. So I don't know if you've heard about that, but our first glacier recently melted, and we had a funeral, a ceremony, ritual of sorts, and he wrote the bronze in memory of. He noted 415 parts per million CO2, I believe, and he said, you know, if we're fortunate enough, you'll be here. It was two future beings. Sort of a note to the future. He's an interesting character who, like Ryan in his own way, he has been politically, personally, and spiritually involved, and he uses art as media, Alicia. So he wrote the book for children called Blue Planet, and he writes for grown-ups, and he tries to write about the acidification of the ocean in a way that we should care about it. So he doesn't write about things scientifically, but he brings in myth and personal stories and talks, relates to environmental things in that way. Yeah.
He'll be here next week.
Yes, he'll be here next week at 10 o'clock. So we like to weave in different types of ways to work with the environment here.
So that brings us to the end of the show, Hildur. And I really, again, want to say thank you again, Ryan, for being here. Thank you, Hildur, for your energy, enthusiasm, for beaming in all the way from beautiful Vermont with the trees and the horses and all that wonderful stuff and your connection with the earth. And I'm Keith Fiveson with the Center for Wellbeing, the Work Mindfulness Project. And again, I want to thank everyone. You will see this post on YouTube, and we will be posting it on various other channels as well. So this brings us to the end. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks, Ryan, for joining us.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Good luck today.
Thank you. Yeah, hope to see some of y'all on.
Hildur, you have to stop the recording on your end. I'm sorry. Hildur, you have to stop the recording on your end.